Preparations to resume grain exports are underway in Ukraine despite the missile strike on the port city of Odesa. Russia has denied any involvement. The attack came a day after the UN brokered a deal between Moscow and Kyiv to unblock grain shipments on the Black Sea. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called the attack blatant barbarism, saying it proved Russia cannot be trusted to implement the deal.
The Ukrainian port of Odesa on fire. Missiles struck the strategic city only a day after a deal was made to unblock grain shipments from Ukrainian ports. For many in Odesa, the culprit was obvious.
Putin promised that they wouldn't bomb and agreed they'd give safe passage so they could get the grain out. But what does he do? He bombs.
I cannot say that I'm surprised. I mean, Russia always goes back on its word. It's a nation that lies and steals and does whatever it wants for its own gain.
In conversations with Turkey, who brokered the deal, Russia was quick to deny responsibility.
In our contact with Russia, the Russians stated that they had absolutely nothing to do with this attack and that they were examining the issue very closely.
But authorities in Kyiv called the attack a spit in the face and warned that Moscow could not be trusted to uphold its promises.
If anyone in the world could have said before that some kind of dialogue with Russia, some kind of agreement would be necessary, look at what's happening. Today, Russian Kalibr missiles have destroyed the very possibility of such statements.
The grain deal had been hailed by the UN as a beacon of hope for millions in the face of a global food crisis. But less than 24 hours after it was signed, the deal to unblock Ukraine's ports now hangs by a thread.
Let's get across now to DW's Matthias Bollinger, who joins me from Kyiv. Matthias, does all of this mean that grain exports will now not be going ahead?
Well, Ukraine is planning to go ahead with these grain exports, so it's quite possible that there will be attempts, maybe successful attempts, to ship out grain. But of course, it's a warning to every crew member on these ships. These ships will be Turkish ships, that they are a potential target, and that's probably what Russia intended. It's an act of sabotage of this agreement. That's very clear.
Now, it has now been 5 months since Russia attacked Ukraine. You've been covering this war for us since then. How have Ukrainians adjusted to this new reality of living under war?
Look, if you'd been in a coma for the past 5 months, you woke up and you would be brought to Kyiv, you'd be forgiven for not knowing that there is a war going on. It's really the obvious signs of the war in the capital. I'm talking about the capital. The situation is, of course, different in the east and south. Many of the signs of the war, the checkpoints, the scared people who wouldn't dare to go out on the streets, all these signs are gone. A few things do persist. There is a curfew, etc. But mostly life has returned to normal. But it's a normality where your friend, your brother, your daughter are somewhere fighting and they might never come back. That's the reality for people. So of course there is tension. But people are trying to somehow go on with their lives, which they have not become easier. We have people are out of jobs, factories are closed, etc. Life is tougher than it was before, but people are trying to keep the spirit to maintain some kind of a normality, of a life aside of the war. You cannot live in this exceptional mode that you had in the first month of the war permanently. So people are trying to cope with it, and maybe let's listen to what some of the people here on the streets are saying.
I think the war should stop as fast as possible, and I want that someone helps us, because war takes a lot of lives every day. And the more efforts we do to stop the war, the more lives will be saved. And in general, the war is something that should not happen in any country in the modern world. It is just horrible.
The side that has common sense will win, but it is us who have common sense because we are strong and therefore we will win. Our children are living here. How could we leave all that behind and tolerate the war? We're tired of all this. Air raid alarms, constant bombings, cities are being shelled. I don't understand this. People are dying and this is the worst. It's impossible that Ukrainians who have been fighting for their freedom for ages will not win this war, this bloody occupying war.
Now, I think that no matter how long this war lasts, we have to stay strong, not get distracted, because our warriors need our support, and we should work on our victory. Together, everyone has to do what one can do best.
Thank you for those testimonies from Ukraine. So, Matthias, after 5 months of fighting, is there any indication Ukraine will be able to regain control over the territory now under Russian control?
And that's hard to say, but what we are seeing is that there is another shift in the course of the war. It's been happening in the past maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the multiple rocket launches arrived from the west. So the first phase was this attack from all sides on Ukraine that has been fought back by the Ukrainian forces quite well with anti-tank weapons mostly, this uncoordinated attack by Russia. The second phase was this artillery war, mainly in the east, where Russia concentrated all its firepower on a few places, and they were firing. They had 10 times more or 15 times more ammunition than the Ukrainians, and they were able to basically slowly advance. It was a slow grinding advance. Now, with the arrival of the multiple rocket launches, Ukraine is much more able to hit the infrastructure behind the lines of the Russians, and that has slowed their advance, and that has considerably changed the dynamics on the field. But whether this is enough to go forward and retake these territories for Ukraine is pretty much a question, because at least that's what Ukrainian military is saying, that they would need a lot more weapons and possibly different weapons to advance. So what they can do now is to considerably make it difficult for Russia to continue this path, but they are not yet able to retake these territories. The gains they have been making, for example, in the south, in this counter-offensive that they have announced, are also incremental at the moment.
Correspondent Matthias Bullinger for us in Kyiv. Thank you, as always, for your reporting.